Hey, it's Sam from Sugar Spun Run, and today we're making waffle cookies. Okay, judging by the title of today's recipe, I hope you're not surprised to learn that you are going to need a waffle maker before we begin. Now, a couple notes. I don't really recommend a Belgian waffle maker. It just is too deep and it makes the cookies a little bit too thick. They tend to fall apart, so stick with something more shallow, just a classic waffle maker. You do not have to use a mini heart-shaped one, but that is what I'm using today. It just happens to be what I have on hand. Mini is also great because then you can end up with uniform cookies. I think they just look nicer with this. It's pretty inexpensive. I'll link to it, but if you have a standard classic waffle iron, you can absolutely use that. This recipe comes together really quickly. The longest part is probably waiting to cook each waffle cookie individually, which also does happen pretty quickly. But let's go ahead and start making our cookie dough. We're going to begin with 1/2 cup or 1 stick of softened unsalted butter. Now, I actually accidentally pulled out my salted butter today, so that's what I'm using, and I'll tell you how to adjust the salt if you happen to do the same thing, or if you only have salted butter on hand yourself. Next, we'll be adding 3/4 cup of granulated sugar and just 3 tablespoons of firmly packed light brown sugar. Today's recipe could be made using a stand mixer, but I'm going to be using my electric hand mixer today, and I'll be creaming these ingredients together. Okay, once those ingredients are well creamed, we are going to add 1 large egg. Ideally, this should be room temperature. Ooh, that was close. We only lost a very teeny tiny bit, so I'm good with that. We'll also be adding 3/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and we'll stir everything together again. All right, this is nicely combined. We'll set it aside, and in a separate mixing bowl, we're going to combine 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. Get that all in there. I don't know if it's trying to stay behind. With a tablespoon of cornstarch, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/8 teaspoon of baking soda, and had you used unsalted butter, you would be adding 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Since we used salted butter, we are just going to be adding 1/4 teaspoon of table salt. All right, let's whisk everything together until these dry ingredients are nicely incorporated. And now we can gradually add this to our butter mixture. As you can see, everything just comes together really quickly with this recipe. There's no chilling required, so that's a nice bonus. And this dough is not going to be thin like a waffle batter would be. It's supposed to be thicker like a cookie dough because we want our waffles to be cookies and not actual waffles. These are sort of like a waffle sugar cookie, but better. And the glaze, the maple glaze on top, you are going to love it. All right, now get your waffle iron nice and hot. Realistically, you could have this plugged in and warming up while you're preparing your dough. That's actually the smart thing to do. Now I use a rounded 1.5 tablespoon sized scoop per cookie. So once your iron is nice and hot, we can go ahead and add that cookie dough. Now you could just drop it in the middle and let the iron distribute the dough, but to get a more uniform cookie, what I like to do is I'll drop this dough in my hands. You can see it's pretty manageable, and I'll place it in like 3 parts. Just helps distribute it a little bit better. We'll close this up firmly. And we're going to cook these cookies until they are nice and golden brown. How long exactly this takes can vary depending on your iron. For me, it's about 90 seconds. Now I have my cooling rack here. I'll turn my cookies out into this as soon as they're done. And I always expect the first cookie to be a little bit wonky. I consider it my test cookie. Let's take a look. There we go, nice and golden. So you could use a fork to gently remove it, but I don't always have the best success doing that. So I will very carefully drop. Oh, it's sticking a little bit, so now I'll use the fork. But I prefer to carefully drop it onto the cooling rack just because I'm less likely to break the cookie that way. But again, be very careful. It's a hot surface, it's a hot iron, so be very mindful before touching it. Let's go ahead and do another one. There we go. As I said, this is pretty much the longest process of making the cookies, which is why I made the batch a little bit smaller. The dough comes together really fast, but you are going to spend about 20 active minutes actually cooking them. Now the cookies are going to be very soft and fragile while they're still warm, so you don't want to touch them or remove them from the cooling rack or add the glaze until they have cooled, I'd say at least almost completely. Okay, so we've only done a few of these cookies. You will get more than this, but you don't need to watch me make all of them. Let's start making our maple glaze, which is just the cherry on top of this waffle cookie. The maple glaze on top, the maple syrup on top. It's just really good. Okay, so when I was making these waffle cookies, I wanted them to obviously have a nice waffle flavor. The cookies themselves are like the waffle that you would put on your plate before you add any toppings. So I wanted the glaze to reflect the toppings you would put on that waffle. Obviously, we're starting with maple syrup. This is 1/3 cup of maple syrup. I'm going to add this to a mixing bowl, it's just a small mixing bowl. And I never add maple syrup unless I'm adding butter because I love that buttery maple flavor. This is 3 tablespoons of salted butter. If you are using unsalted, just add a pinch of salt. So this is going to be so good on top of those cookies. We've got the butter, we've got the maple. So I'm just going to quickly mix these together until they're a little bit combined, and then I'll add our sugar. This is 1 cup of powdered sugar, and I'm going to add it a little bit slowly. Oh, the bowl had other plans for me. I'm going to whisk everything together until it's nicely combined. And it smells like a waffle breakfast in here. Oh, it smells so good. Okay, so I'm looking for a glaze that's nice and smooth, so I'm using my whisk to break up any lumps from the powdered sugar. And once it's nice and smooth, it should ribbon smoothly from the whisk back into the bowl, and it's ready to use. Now you can apply the glaze however you'd like. I like a lot, so what I might do is take one of the cookies and make sure it's cooled completely before you do this, otherwise it could break. And I might just nestle this right into the glaze. That way I have a nice even coating. Alternatively, you can take a spoon and just sort of drizzle the glaze over the cookies. And if you're dipping, you do not want to handle the cookies while they're still warm, but if you're just drizzling a glaze, you can add it while they're still warm. The glaze may sort of melt a little bit into the cookie, and that's not a bad thing. Let's drizzle one more. Don't skimp on it because this adds such a great flavor. And let's dip one more. That is all there is to making these fun waffle cookies. They're definitely unique in their texture and their flavor. I'm really excited for you to try them, and if you do, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. I'll never get over how much I love these. This would be good for like a brunch, or they're just good, period.